What if I told you that Japan's legendary period of self-isolation wasn't a peaceful withdrawal from the world, but one of history's most sophisticated totalitarian experiments that turned an entire nation into a prison where even thinking about the outside world could get you and your entire family executed? Everyone knows the story of Japan's Sakoku period. From 1633 to 1853, Japan supposedly closed its borders to maintain cultural purity and avoid foreign contamination. It's presented as a wise policy that allowed Japanese culture to develop authentically, creating the refined society of samurai, geishas, and Zen gardens that we romanticize today. The isolation is portrayed as voluntary, peaceful, and ultimately beneficial. But what if I told you that this version of history is a carefully sanitized fairy tale designed to hide one of the most brutal social control systems ever devised? What if Japan's isolation wasn't about cultural preservation, but about creating a surveillance state so complete that neighbors spied on neighbors, children informed on parents, and entire communities were held collectively responsible for individual thoughts and actions? You've heard about the beauty of isolated Japanese culture, the refinement of arts like tea ceremony and flower arrangement, the philosophical depth of Zen Buddhism, but you haven't heard about the crucifixions, the systematic torture, the mass executions, and the industrial-scale brainwashing that made this supposed golden age possible. Behind the myth of peaceful isolation lies a story of state terror so sophisticated it would make Stalin envious. The Tokugawa shogunate didn't just close Japan's borders, they transformed the entire country into a laboratory for testing the limits of human control. For over 2 centuries, they conducted the largest and longest-running experiment in totalitarian governance in human history. The methods they developed were so effective that traces of their social control systems persist in Japanese society today. The group conformity, the fear of standing out, the automatic deference to authority that many consider quintessentially Japanese. These aren't ancient cultural traditions. They're the psychological scars left by centuries of systematic terror. The most disturbing part? It worked so well that other governments studied Japanese isolation techniques and adapted them for their own purposes. The blueprint for the modern surveillance state was written in feudal Japan, where the technology of oppression was perfected through methods that would horrify even contemporary dictators. If you think you're ready to learn what really happened during Japan's supposed golden age of isolation, subscribe to this channel and let me know in the comments what you thought you knew about traditional Japanese culture. Because once you understand how that culture was actually created, you'll never look at Japan the same way again. Let's begin with the official narrative that has shaped our understanding of Japan's isolationist period. According to this sanitized version, the Tokugawa shogunate implemented the Sakoku, or closed country policy, in 1633 as a measured response to the growing influence of European missionaries and traders who threatened to destabilize Japanese society. The policy is typically presented as a rational decision by wise leaders who recognize that foreign influence could corrupt traditional Japanese values and social harmony. The Tokugawa shoguns are portrayed as benevolent rulers who prioritize cultural preservation over economic gain, choosing spiritual purity over material wealth. Under this system, we're told, Japan developed a uniquely sophisticated culture in isolation from foreign contamination. The arts flourished as never before, with painters, poets, and craftsmen achieving unprecedented levels of refinement. The famous ukiyo-e woodblock prints, the elaborate kabuki theater, and the philosophical depth of Zen gardens all emerged during this period of creative isolation. The social structure of Tokugawa Japan is usually described as a stable hierarchy that provided security and purpose for all levels of society. The samurai class devoted themselves to martial arts, philosophy, and administration. Farmers, artisans, and merchants each had clearly defined roles that contributed to overall social harmony. Everyone knew their place, and this certainty supposedly created peace and prosperity. The economic system that developed during isolation is presented as a marvel of sustainable development. Without access to foreign markets or resources, Japan was forced to become completely self-sufficient. This led to innovations in agriculture, manufacturing, and resource management that allowed the country to support a growing population while maintaining environmental balance. Japanese Buddhism and Shinto during this period are typically portrayed as achieving a unique synthesis that represented the spiritual pinnacle of East Asian civilization. Temples and shrines became centers of learning and artistic achievement. Monks and priests provided moral guidance and social services. Religious festivals created community bonds and cultural continuity. The educational system that emerged during isolation is often praised as one of history's most successful literacy campaigns. By the end of the Tokugawa period, Japan had achieved literacy rates that exceeded those of most European countries. This educational achievement is presented as evidence of the regime's commitment to human development and social progress. Even the restrictions imposed by the isolation policy are usually presented in positive terms. The ban on foreign travel is described as protecting Japanese people from the corruption and violence they would encounter abroad. The prohibition on foreign books is explained as preserving Japanese intellectual purity. The execution of returning travelers is portrayed as regrettable but necessary to maintain the integrity of the closed system. The famous Sankin Kotai system, which required regional lords to spend alternate years in the capital, is typically described as a brilliant method for ensuring political stability while promoting cultural exchange. Lords would bring their retainers and families to Edo, creating a vibrant cosmopolitan culture while preventing the development of regional power bases that could challenge central authority. Trade relationships with China and Korea through carefully controlled ports are presented as evidence that Japan wasn't completely isolated, but rather selectively engaged with the outside world on its own terms. The Dutch trading post at Dejima is described as a window to the West that allowed Japan to monitor foreign developments without compromising its cultural integrity. The technological and artistic achievements of isolated Japan are often cited as proof that the policy was successful. Japanese swordsmiths achieved legendary skill, creating blades that were technically superior to European weapons. Japanese architects developed earthquake-resistant construction techniques. Japanese farmers created agricultural methods that sustained large populations without depleting the soil. This narrative suggests that Japan's isolation was a golden age of cultural achievement and social harmony that was only disrupted by the arrival of Commodore Perry's black ships in 1853. The forced opening of Japan is presented as a tragedy that ended a period of unprecedented peace and prosperity, forcing Japan to abandon its authentic development path and embrace Western materialism. Most importantly, this version of history implies that Japanese isolation was fundamentally voluntary and peaceful. While there were certainly some restrictions and regulations, the overall system is portrayed as enjoying broad popular support because it delivered stability, prosperity, and cultural achievement that benefited everyone in Japanese society. But what if every single element of this comfortable narrative is a lie designed to hide the most sophisticated system of population control ever implemented by a pre-modern government? The reality of Tokugawa Japan wasn't peaceful isolation, but systematic terror implemented through mechanisms of surveillance and control that penetrated every aspect of daily life. The shogunate didn't simply close the borders, they created a prison state where every citizen was simultaneously a guard and a prisoner in an elaborate system of mutual surveillance. The foundation of this system was the gonengumi, or five-family group structure that made every household responsible for monitoring and controlling the behavior of their neighbors. These weren't voluntary community associations, but mandatory surveillance units where family heads were required to report any suspicious activity, unusual visitors, or deviant thoughts expressed by their neighbors. But the gonengumi system was just the beginning. Every aspect of Japanese life was regulated through overlapping networks of control that made independent thought or action virtually impossible. Temples were required to maintain detailed records of every person in their district, noting their religious practices, family relationships, and behavioral patterns. These records were regularly inspected by government agents who looked for any signs of foreign influence or political dissent. The enforcement mechanisms for these control systems were deliberately brutal and public. When the shogunate discovered evidence of foreign contact or Christian practice, they didn't simply execute the individuals involved. They tortured them to death in elaborate public ceremonies designed to terrorize entire communities into absolute compliance. The most infamous of these terror campaigns was the systematic persecution of Japanese Christians, which involved torture techniques that horrified even contemporary European observers. Suspected Christians were subjected to tsurushi, being hung upside down over pits filled with excrement and rotting corpses until they either renounced their faith or died from blood loss to the brain. But the sexual dimension of this persecution was even more disturbing. Female Christians were frequently subjected to public rape before execution, often by multiple perpetrators while crowds of forced spectators watched. These sexual assaults weren't random acts of violence, but calculated components of the terror system designed to demonstrate the complete powerlessness of those who challenged state authority. The children of executed Christians weren't spared, but were instead subjected to systematic psychological torture designed to break their connection to foreign influences. They would be forced to watch their parents' executions, then placed in special institutions where they were subjected to daily indoctrination sessions designed to reprogram their basic understanding of reality. The economic control systems were equally sophisticated and equally brutal. The shogunate didn't just regulate foreign trade, they created a command economy where every economic transaction was monitored and controlled by government agents. Merchants were required to obtain licenses for every type of business activity, and these licenses could be revoked instantly if the merchant showed any signs of political unreliability. The famous artistic achievements of isolated Japan weren't expressions of creative freedom, but products of a system that channeled all creative energy into government-approved forms. Artists who attempted to create works that reference foreign themes or challenge social hierarchies would face immediate persecution. The beautiful prints and paintings that we admire today were created by artists who understood that any deviation from approved subjects could result in their execution. The travel restrictions that are presented as protecting Japanese people from foreign corruption were actually methods for preventing the spread of information that could undermine government control. Japanese people weren't prohibited from traveling abroad to preserve their cultural purity. They were trapped within the islands to prevent them from learning about alternative forms of social organization that might inspire resistance to Tokugawa rule. The educational system that supposedly promoted literacy was actually a massive indoctrination program designed to fill people's minds with approved information while preventing them from accessing any knowledge that could challenge government authority. Schools taught reading and writing, but only using texts that reinforce political obedience and social conformity. The religious synthesis that supposedly represented a spiritual golden age was actually the result of systematic persecution that forced Buddhism and Shinto to serve state propaganda purposes. Temples weren't centers of spiritual development, but surveillance stations where priests were required to monitor and report on the political reliability of their congregations. Now let me tell you the story of Takayama Ukon, a man whose life perfectly illustrates how the Tokugawa system destroyed individual conscience and transformed an entire society into an engine of mutual oppression. His biography reveals the human cost of Japan's supposed golden age and shows how even the most privileged members of society became victims of the surveillance state. Takayama Ukon was born in 1552 into a powerful samurai family that controlled significant territory in central Japan. As a young man, he distinguished himself as both a warrior and a cultural sophisticate, mastering not only military arts but also poetry, tea ceremony, and Buddhist philosophy. He seemed destined for a life of honor and achievement within the traditional Japanese social system. But Ukon's life took a dramatic turn when he encountered Christian missionaries in the 1560s. Unlike many Japanese who converted to Christianity for political or economic advantages, Ukon appears to have been genuinely moved by Christian teachings about human dignity and spiritual equality. His conversion wasn't a calculated political decision, but a sincere religious transformation that would ultimately destroy his life. Initially, Ukon's Christian faith didn't conflict with his political loyalties. During the late 16th century, several powerful Japanese leaders were Christians, or at least tolerant of Christianity. Ukon served loyally under Oda Nobunaga and later Toyotomi Hideyoshi, demonstrating that it was possible to be both a faithful Christian and a loyal Japanese subject. But as the Tokugawa regime consolidated power and implemented increasingly strict control measures, Ukon found himself caught between irreconcilable loyalties. The new shogunate demanded not just political obedience, but ideological conformity that was incompatible with his Christian beliefs. He was forced to choose between his faith and his position in Japanese society. The psychological pressure of this choice was enormous. Ukon wasn't just being asked to abandon a personal belief system. He was being required to betray a community of fellow Christians who looked to him for leadership and protection. Many of these Christians were his own retainers and their families, people whose lives depended on his political position and social status. The Tokugawa regime understood that Ukon's high profile made him particularly dangerous as a Christian example. If a man of his status and accomplishments could maintain his faith despite government pressure, it would encourage other Christians to resist the new persecution policies. Conversely, if they could force him to renounce Christianity publicly, it would demonstrate the futility of resistance and encourage mass apostasy. The campaign to break Ukon's will wasn't crude or immediate, but sophisticated and prolonged. Government agents began by pressuring his business associates and political allies to cut ties with him. His income was gradually reduced through bureaucratic harassment and economic sanctions. His children were excluded from educational opportunities and marriage prospects that would normally be available to a family of their status. But the most effective pressure came through the systematic persecution of Christians under his protection. Tokugawa agents would arrest and torture his Christian retainers, making it clear that their suffering was the direct result of Ukon's refusal to conform. He was forced to watch as people who had served his family faithfully for generations were subjected to horrific tortures because of their association with him. The sexual dimension of this persecution was particularly cruel. Female Christians in Ucon's service were subjected to systematic rape and sexual torture, often in locations where he could hear their screams but could do nothing to help them. The message was clear. His Christian convictions were directly responsible for the sexual violence being inflicted on innocent women. As the persecution intensified, Ukon found himself increasingly isolated from the social networks that had defined his entire life. Former friends and allies abandoned him to protect themselves from government suspicion. His own family members began to pressure him to renounce Christianity to save the family's honor and prosperity. The final blow came when the shogunate issued an ultimatum that gave Ukon a simple choice: publicly renounce Christianity and order all Christians under his authority to do the same, or face exile from Japan forever. This wasn't just a personal decision, but a choice that would determine the fate of hundreds of people who had converted to Christianity under his influence. Ukon's decision to choose exile over apostasy is often presented as a heroic stand for religious freedom. But the reality was far more complex and far more tragic. By maintaining his faith, Ukon condemned the Christians under his protection to continued persecution while abandoning them to face that persecution without his protection. In 1614, at the age of 62, Ukon was forced to board a ship bound for the Philippines along with several hundred other Christian exiles. The journey itself was designed as a form of torture, with exiles packed into overcrowded ships with inadequate food and water. Many died during the voyage, and their bodies were thrown overboard without ceremony. Ukon survived the journey but died in Manila just 40 days after his arrival, officially from illness but actually from the accumulated stress and trauma of his persecution. His death marked the end of a life that had been systematically destroyed by a government that couldn't tolerate any form of independence or alternative loyalty. But Ukon's story doesn't end with his death. The Tokugawa regime used his exile as propaganda to demonstrate the consequences of resistance to state authority. They spread stories about the miserable conditions that exiles faced abroad, describing foreign countries as violent and chaotic places where Japanese people couldn't survive. More significantly, the regime used Ukon's absence to complete the destruction of the Christian community he had protected. Without his political protection, the remaining Christians in his former territory were systematically hunted down and executed. Entire families were wiped out, and their property was confiscated by the state. The final insult came when the Tokugawa regime rewrote Ukon's biography to serve their propaganda purposes. Official histories portrayed him not as a man of principle who chose exile over apostasy, but as a traitor who had been seduced by foreign influences into betraying his natural loyalties. His former achievements were minimized or attributed to others, and his Christian faith was presented as evidence of mental instability. This brings us to the darkest secret of Japan's isolationist period: the systematic campaign of psychological warfare that the Tokugawa regime waged against its own population to ensure that the Takayama Ukon tragedy would never be repeated. The shogunate didn't just persecute Christians and other dissidents. They implemented a comprehensive program of social engineering designed to eliminate the very possibility of independent thought or conscience. The centerpiece of this campaign was the Fumi-e, or stepping on pictures ritual that was implemented throughout Japan starting in the 1620s. Every person in every community was required to participate in annual ceremonies where they would step on images of Christ and the Virgin Mary to demonstrate their rejection of Christian beliefs. But this wasn't simply a religious test. It was a carefully designed psychological conditioning program. The Fumi-e ceremonies were structured to maximize psychological trauma and social control. They took place in public settings where entire communities would watch each other perform the ritual. Family members were forced to watch their relatives step on sacred images, creating shared guilt and mutual complicity that bound everyone together in collective apostasy. But the most insidious aspect of the Fumia system was how it was designed to destroy the possibility of private belief. The ritual wasn't just about public conformity. It was about forcing people to commit acts that were so psychologically damaging that they couldn't maintain their original beliefs even in private. By making everyone complicit in the desecration of their own sacred symbols, the regime ensured that genuine faith became psychologically impossible. The ceremonies were also designed to identify potential resistors through subtle signs of reluctance or distress. Government agents would carefully observe participants for any signs of hesitation, emotional reaction, or other indicators that they might still harbor forbidden beliefs. Those who showed such signs would be subjected to additional scrutiny and potential persecution. But the Fumia system was only one component of a much larger program of psychological control that penetrated every aspect of daily life. The regime established networks of informants that reached into every household, workplace, and social organization. Children were trained to report on their parents, servants were encouraged to spy on their masters, and neighbors were rewarded for denouncing each other. The economic dimension of this surveillance system was equally comprehensive. The shogunate created a complex system of licenses, permits, and regulations that made economic survival dependent on political reliability. Anyone who showed signs of independent thinking would find themselves unable to obtain the licenses necessary to conduct business, practice a trade, or even travel between districts. Marriage and family formation were also subject to political control. Matches between families were evaluated not just for economic and social compatibility, but for political reliability. People with any history of foreign contact or religious nonconformity would find it impossible to arrange marriages for their children, effectively ending their bloodlines. The educational system was transformed into an indoctrination apparatus that filled students' minds with approved information while systematically eliminating their capacity for critical thinking. Curriculum was carefully designed to emphasize obedience, conformity, and acceptance of social hierarchy, while discouraging questions or independent analysis. Religious institutions were converted into surveillance stations where priests and monks were required to monitor their congregations for signs of political unreliability. Traditional Buddhist and Shinto practices were modified to serve state purposes, with religious ceremonies becoming opportunities for political indoctrination and community surveillance. The artistic and cultural restrictions were equally systematic and equally destructive. Artists, writers, and performers were required to submit all their work for government approval before public presentation. Any work that could be interpreted as criticism of the regime or advocacy for alternative values would result in severe punishment for both the creator and anyone associated with its production or distribution. But perhaps the most psychologically destructive aspect of the Tokugawa control system was how it turned the population against itself. By creating a society where everyone was simultaneously a potential victim and a potential informant, the regime eliminated the possibility of trust, solidarity, or collective resistance. The sexual control mechanisms were equally comprehensive and equally brutal. The regime monitored and regulated sexual relationships to ensure that they served state purposes rather than individual desires. prostitution was legalized and regulated not to protect sex workers, but to channel male sexual energy into politically harmless directions, while providing the state with additional opportunities for surveillance and control. Women's sexuality was particularly tightly controlled through systems that treated women's bodies as state resources rather than individual property. Marriage, reproduction, and child-rearing were all subject to government regulation designed to ensure that the next generation would be even more thoroughly conditioned for obedience than their parents. The regime also used sexual violence as a tool of political control, with rape and sexual torture being routinely employed against the families of suspected dissidents. This violence wasn't random or unauthorized, but was systematically implemented as part of a comprehensive program designed to demonstrate the total powerlessness of anyone who challenged state authority. By the end of the 17th century, these comprehensive control mechanisms had succeeded in creating a population that was psychologically incapable of resistance. The Japanese people hadn't simply been forced to conform to government demands. They had been systematically conditioned to desire conformity and to feel genuine anxiety about any form of independence or nonconformity. The arrival of Commodore Perry's fleet in 1853 didn't encounter a confident, culturally sophisticated society that was choosing isolation from a position of strength. Instead, Perry found a traumatized population that had been so thoroughly conditioned for obedience that they were psychologically incapable of making independent decisions about their own future. The rapid modernization of Japan during the Meiji period wasn't evidence of Japanese adaptability and cultural strength. It was the response of a population that had been so thoroughly broken by centuries of systematic oppression that they automatically adopted whatever new forms of authority were presented to them, regardless of whether those forms served their actual interests. The psychological conditioning systems developed during the Tokugawa period didn't disappear with the restoration of imperial rule. They were simply redirected toward new purposes. The same mechanisms that had been used to eliminate Christian influence were later used to promote emperor worship, militarism, and imperial expansion. The social conformity that is often praised as a distinctively Japanese cultural trait isn't an ancient tradition rooted in Buddhist philosophy or Confucian ethics. It's the psychological scar tissue left by centuries of systematic terror that taught people that any form of individual expression or independent thinking could result in their destruction and the destruction of everyone they cared about. Understanding the true nature of Japan's isolationist period reveals how quickly and completely a sophisticated society can be transformed into a totalitarian system through the systematic application of psychological pressure and social control. The techniques pioneered by the Tokugawa regime were so effective that they influenced the development of modern totalitarian movements throughout the world. The story of Japanese isolation also demonstrates how historical narratives can be manipulated to serve contemporary political purposes. The romanticized version of the Sakoku period that emphasizes cultural achievement and social harmony serves to legitimize contemporary Japanese social conformity while obscuring the violent origins of that conformity. Perhaps most importantly, the Japanese experience shows how totalitarian control can be disguised as cultural tradition and social stability. The very features of Japanese society that are most admired by foreign observers, the group loyalty, the respect for authority, the aesthetic refinement, are actually the products of one of history's most successful programs of psychological conditioning and social control. The techniques developed during Japan's isolation period continue to influence Japanese society today, creating patterns of behavior and thought that persist long after the original terror system has been dismantled. Understanding this history is essential for recognizing how contemporary social control systems operate and how they can be resisted. The archives containing the full documentation of the Tokugawa terror system remain largely closed to researchers, with the Japanese government continuing to restrict access to materials that might damage Japan's international reputation or challenge comfortable narratives about Japanese cultural tradition. This ongoing secrecy suggests that powerful interests continue to benefit from hiding the true history of Japan's isolationist period. Recent archaeological discoveries have uncovered evidence that confirms some of the most disturbing aspects of Tokugawa social control, including mass graves containing the remains of persecution victims and physical evidence of the torture facilities that were used to break political and religious dissidents. If this exploration of Japan's hidden history of systematic oppression has made you question what other golden ages might actually be periods of carefully concealed terror, subscribe to this channel for more investigations into how historical narratives are constructed to serve contemporary power structures. And let me know in the comments which aspects of traditional Japanese culture you now view differently after learning about their actual origins. Because understanding how totalitarian systems disguise themselves as cultural traditions is essential for recognizing and resisting similar systems